Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome to another great episode here at IT Pro TV. In this episode, we're going to be looking at Project Plus, CompTIA's Project Plus. We're going to be looking at explaining resource management. In the last couple of episodes, we've been looking at this topic, but last episode we looked at personnel management, and we're going to go ahead and continue with some of those concepts, but really specifically looking at conflict management. So with us, we have Mr. Ronnie Wong. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you for having me back on the show as we continue on with taking a look at conflict resolution tools that we can use as project managers. Now remember that this doesn't mean that you're going to be an expert at conflict resolution simply by watching the previous show and this show, but at least as a project manager, hopefully these will give you some of the ways that you actually understand how conflict happens and how you can deal with them as a project manager as well. So there are eventually tools that we can use as we start to see this. So previously, let's go ahead and take a look at my screen here, and that will help us out in terms of reviewing as well. So when we start taking a look at some of the techniques, we've talked about the idea of smoothing.
And forcing.
Yeah, and forcing. And so when we start taking a look at those two, remember that those end up giving us a potential type of resolution where in smoothing it's a lose-lose. Nobody really feels like anything was really accomplished at that particular point, and we end up minimizing whatever real problem we have. And in forcing, we essentially pick the winner. And so there's a winner, and that means that by the very other fact is that somebody ends up also picking the loser, which is you. You're also going to pick the loser as well. So we need to move on, and we need to talk about the idea that's probably most appealing to the majority of us, okay, which is the idea of compromise, okay? Now, when we start talking about the idea of compromise here, one of the key aspects of compromise is simple. Both sides essentially let go of something that they're hanging on to. Okay?
Yeah, and if you're in a relationship or married, then you know exactly what we're talking about here.
All right, so that's Cherokee at itpro.tv. No, the very fact is, yes, there's no doubt that here parties are actually involved to give up something to reach a resolution of some sort. Whoa, Cherokee went that way. Yes, that actually did happen here. But overall, though, yes.
Oh, you know that they're thinking it.
Oh, there's no doubt that there is compromise in marriage in some of these things, but hopefully not in everything. But here, we both sides of whatever they're on the conflict, right? They give up something for the sake of reaching a resolution. Now, when you start to see this, though, you also have to then ensure that if they're willing to give that up, that they're also saying that they are committed to whatever resolution it's going to be. And that's where it becomes a little bit harder. Because as much as both sides say that they're willing to give up something to come to a resolution, it usually is a very negotiated type of peace that you have or a resolution that's there. And if anybody happens to violate that compromise at any point, even in the smallest iota, okay, a very, very smallest bit of that compromise, somebody is now calling for blood. Now, I know that in that sense I'm over-dramatizing it a bit, but somebody is normally calling for something else to happen, to step in, and everything else has to be the way that it is. So in that sense, they have to be committed to the resolution. Compromise takes a long time because nobody's willing, first of all, to give up anything. And then once you convince them that they have to give that up for this to actually happen, well, then that means that they are willing to agree to it even if they don't like it, which is when you really end up with something that you don't want, okay? That nobody feels like that they've won anything, but nobody really feels like that they've lost anything super important, because normally they only are willing to sacrifice the smallest bit that they can. And so you also end up with the very fact that there's not going to be a buy-in to the resolution, which means it is a negotiated type of peace that you have. And because of that, it's exactly like I said here, the potential for conflicts to happen over and over again about the same issue is going to happen, okay? And that is because all it takes is one side to tip the balance here, to not meet the idea of compromise, and the other person to say, you know, we agreed on this compromise, but you're still doing the same things. And the other person just has to say, no, I'm not. And it can say, yes, you are, and then there it is. You have to renegotiate the idea of that type of resolution. So in that sense, compromise, even though it might sound like a great idea, okay, even though you actually do work through situations where you might find yourself, that is the best piece that you can have. You also have to be ready then as a project manager to deal with it over and over again if it does arise. Okay? All right. Now, there are, of course, some other ones that we can also take a look at too, and so let's go ahead and do that. Now, I'm going to leave confronting here for just for the last, because that's probably the best one that we have. I know it sounds strange, but it really isn't. So I'm going to leave that one for the best. Let's talk about the other two here too. Okay? So let's talk about the idea of avoiding. Okay? Now, avoidance is never actually a conflict resolution at all. It is simply, for us here, no resolution is ever going to be reached. One side essentially stops negotiating, stops discussing the conflict at all. And when that happens, it means you're not going to come to any type of agreement that a resolution can even occur. So in this, nobody's actually dealing with the issue. Okay?
Let's just act like an ostrich, stick our head in the sand, and pretend there's not even a problem.
Yeah, and well, I don't think they pretend like there's not a problem. They just refuse to say that there's a problem, even though there is. Okay? So it doesn't seem like that they just kind of go on with life. What they do is simply say, I don't want to talk about it. Okay? So at that point, you know what? You know that they really do want to talk about it, but it's just not with you, nor with anybody that asked them. They really want to talk about it with somebody that is going to essentially take their side. And that's pretty much it when you talk about the ideas of avoidance here. Now, can this actually work? Believe it or not, it actually can work. Okay? If your project is close to the end, I know I'm not saying that this is what you should do. If your project is close to the end of the time that your project is starting to wrap up, then avoidance can work in a very uneasy type of piece that you have, but it doesn't really help. Okay? You end up getting people that are now dissatisfied with the work that you're doing, as well as whoever they're having that conflict with as well. So it's always better to do something else. Okay? Anything else is always better. Then we also have, of course, negotiation. Okay? Now, whenever we start talking about negotiating, this is where it becomes a little bit more arbitrary, and the very fact that they now actually involve a third party to help everybody come into agreement. And in this sense, this is where collective bargaining comes in. Now, the problem that we have with negotiations is simple. Unlike the idea of compromise where you give up both sides, usually what ends up happening is in an arbitration type of setting here with negotiation and third party, they actually are kind of King Solomon at this point. They willingly split the baby to see and say, this should make both sides happy. You're not winning anything over the other side, so I'm giving y'all both something. You should be satisfied with what you get. So in this sense, you're not going to actually gain the upper hand, but you're not going to be satisfied with whatever answer you get as well. Now, in negotiation in terms of conflict, okay, negotiation in terms of getting the best deal that you possibly can, that's always something you should do. You should never just settle for the very fact that they say, here's what it's going to be, and then you find out that this is what everybody would tell you. But overall, though, in a conflict, though, negotiation, even though it sounds like, yes, that's what we should do, negotiations, again, do ride like compromises. Nobody really wins because all you get is a piece of what you thought you were going to get, and then you're not happy with that resolution as well.
Ronnie, I don't know what the phrase about the baby, I don't know what you're doing to the baby there, but would that be similar to a mediation from like a legal standpoint?
Yeah, that's exactly what it would be.
Okay.
Yeah, so the story of King Solomon, baby, ends up two people claim the baby, and King Solomon doesn't know how to decide, so he says, here's what I'll do. I'll split the baby in half, and one of the mothers says, go ahead, do it. That's perfectly fine with me. And the one says, no, give it to the other one.
I do remember that.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat story, right? So when you start seeing that, right, and so that solution in that sense wasn't really about trying to negotiate. It was trying to see who
the
really
real
loves the
mother
baby.
was, yes.
But at the same time, though, in real negotiations and mediations is about splitting the baby. It really is. It's about just saying, here's the best solution we are going to come up with, which is something better than what you're ever going to be willing to admit to. But since you're actually here and we're binding this, you're going to have to go ahead and deal with it, the very fact of whatever I choose. And so that normally doesn't make anybody happy. So whether we're talking about what we talk about here? Compromise, avoiding, and negotiating. Usually we have this uneasy resolution at the end. The resolution is either temporary, okay, or the resolution is not really a resolution, you're just kind of settling for whatever you're getting, okay, or you're not really resolving anything. So there has to be one resolution technique that all of us really hate, okay, all of us really don't want to do, okay. Some of us are insanely good at it, and some of us are insanely bad at it, but it is the most effective one that we can do, okay. And this one is the only one that's left, and that is confrontation. So Cherokee, confrontation.
Yeah.
Are you good at confronting people? I am not.
I guess it depends on who you ask.
Oh, there, yeah. So let's not say me at this particular point here, but let's go ahead and say something else. But confrontation is addressing the issue, okay? It is actually saying that problem solving is the key, okay? So it's not saying that, hey, we need to push this aside. It's not saying we've got to figure out how just to get along, you know, and live. What we're saying is what? Let's find what the issue is and resolve it, okay? The point on confrontation, though, okay, especially if you're the one having to bring this up, is that you now have to go on a fact-finding mission and figure out what is underlying the conflict itself. And that's why this is so effective. Now, the idea of confrontation for the sake of being confrontational is never good, okay? I mean it. So there are some people whose personalities, they go, oh no, I love confrontation. I'll do it anytime I have a chance. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the idea of actually confronting the actual problem that we have, and then we take a look at all the facts and we try and find what those facts are, and then we present those facts to both sides, okay, that are actually involved, and we also make sure that the decisions that we make from that fact-finding mission are clear and understandable to both sides, okay? At that point, we all win because they see exactly what the conflict actually is, and then when they do so, they know why the decisions were made in the way that they were. They might not like your decision, okay?
That's right.
But they understand it, okay? They might agree 100% with your decision, okay? And they might, you know, go ahead and say, yeah, that's the best decision that was made, but you didn't win it based on your personality. You didn't win it based on you whining or complaining about it, but it was because it was the right decision to be made, okay?
Kind of like sometimes you have to agree to disagree, right? You see two different perspectives, you acknowledge them, you respect them, and you move on.
Yeah, and when you start seeing this, right, so in this sense then, if you are a project manager and you find yourself and say, I'm not really good at confrontation, I'm not saying go and get in somebody's face right now and yell at them, okay? That's not what I'm saying, but
No.
what I am saying, though, is take a look and maybe go and pick up some different books on the idea of resolving conflicts and usually the idea of how to confront, you know, or address problem issues that come about, and they will help you out at least in getting your mindset ready for it. Most of us don't like confrontation, and a lot of us don't like it because it really does. It sounds like that we are berating somebody when really the idea of confrontation is not to do that. It's to actually find what the problem is and address the issue and make sure that everybody understands what the issues actually are and why the decision has been made the way it has been. Okay. If not, you essentially end up with misunderstanding, and the confrontation now becomes more about personality than it does about the issues. So there's a there is a right way to do confrontation, and that means there's also a wrong way to do it. And your goal as a project manager, especially as projects move on, is to make sure that you are good at doing it the right way. So do try and pick up some additional help in that sense of it. And there's probably complete courses that you can take that really will help you. Some of us, in our own personalities, we're a little bit more demure than others. Some of us are very much vocal and confrontational. And again, it's not that you can't use that to your advantage, but just realize that that's not your goal, is to ensure that everybody knows where your position is, when that's not the key behind confrontation. The key behind confrontation, again, is solving the issue. And this is why it is the best possible resolution technique. The other ones we learn naturally. I hate to say it. We avoid naturally, okay? We tend to try and compromise naturally and negotiate naturally. Kids learn how to negotiate by themselves. So they own that. And it is easier overall. Confrontation takes real strong will to say, I'm going to figure out what's wrong with this, and then let's go ahead and address it together and figure out what it is. Both sides end up winning. So if you want to talk about a win-win type of resolution technique, confrontation is the only one that is a win-win, whereas all the other ones is either kind of a lose-lose, a win-lose situation, or nobody's happy type of situation that you end up with. But in terms of conflict resolution, these are kind of the basics ways that you'll have to deal with them as they do arise in your project. Okay? All right, so that actually brings us then to our last particular point here that we need to talk about just briefly, which is when nothing works.
Exactly. I hate
Yeah.
to say it, but that's our last point here. What do we do at that point, Ronnie?
Yeah, when nothing works in terms of team disputes and everything else that happens, okay, that is when you do have to go above and beyond and talk about the idea of personnel types of replacements or removals. Now, that's exactly like it sounds like. You know, you're fired. I mean, that's exactly what it sounds like. Or, you definitely are not working well with our team. We need to do something else with you, okay? So in that sense, what is it that you actually have to do, okay? So there's going to be team members that end up hopefully not on every single project, but there will be times where you have to actually address that team member that no matter what you have tried to do, whether you tried to confront the problem, whether you tried to negotiate the peace, whatever it is, it doesn't work. Well, this is when you have to go ahead and take a look at it a little bit harder and talk about the fact of whether or not this particular individual needs to be removed or replaced, okay, is what we need to do, okay? So in that sense, when you end up dealing with several things here, let's go ahead and talk about this when you actually have to consider the ideas of replacement of some sort. So on my screen, I went ahead and made a small list here to help us out, okay? So if you're just dealing with team member disputes, okay, well, that's perfectly fine. Remember that in terms of conflict, fact determination, and meetings, okay, usually you involve everybody as much as possible, okay, and say, all right, here it is. This is just a team member dispute. You should be able to solve this, okay? Now, if it doesn't work, right, then at that point, notice that the situation can end up devolving. Okay, and what we mean by that is it can disintegrate. It can really quickly kind of become disastrous for your entire team if you are not careful. Okay, if it then ends up to the point where now it's actually personal issues that are related, here the very fact that it says, hey, this is now getting personal where we're calling each other names, we're, you know, kind of
Right. You don't want
anger.
that negative energy to infect your entire team.
Yeah, you really can't. You can't afford to have that happen. Okay, then at that point you have to involve HR, okay, as well. Okay, and so you may have to do that, and then you have to be willing to stand by the policy and not deviate it from it once it happens. Because if not, you might find yourself in a legal quandary. Now, the best situation and the best example of this that I can tell you, which is something that's actually very neat. I had a friend of mine that actually worked on an oil rig in the Gulf.
Right.
Okay, way back in the 80s here. Okay, he worked on an oil rig, and one of the things he told me, which was amazing to me, I never knew this. He said it's fine when people are working together, and even if they break out in fights, it's perfectly fine. But if there comes a point when two people really don't like each other and they can't stand each other,
There's nowhere to go.
there is nowhere to go, right? But the problem is this, right, is that on that particular thing, on that idea of working on an oil rig, right, no way to go, it essentially ends up infecting the rest of the crew. Okay?
That's true.
Yeah, they end up getting so bent out of shape. So one of the policies in his company was simple. Two people get into that type of a fight where they know that it's not going to be resolved, they immediately separate them into two different rooms, and they do not allow them to essentially talk to anybody nor see anybody. Second step is that whoever the foreman is calls the company, and they immediately send out a helicopter for those two people. They're going to get them off of the rig as soon as possible. They do not want the attitude infecting the rest of the team. So it doesn't matter if it's in the middle of the night or if it's during the middle of the workday. If they have something like that break out, they immediately separate them and they immediately get them off that rig so that work can continue on, and that particular conflict then is handled somewhere else instead of right there on board. because they just can't have the time to stop and do all that while the rest of the team needs to work. So you might even have a situation like that, and that is just HR policy for that particular company back in the 80s.
Well, we even have one here, right, at IT Pro TV.
Yeah.
We have a no drama policy. I love it.
Yeah, it really is. And so hopefully what we have here with that no drama policy, right, and that is if we do create that, we do have a timeout type of situation that we have to worry about. But
I don't think we get helicopter rides, though, do we?
Not easily. Yeah, not easily. But overall, though, okay, that's what may have to happen. All right.
All
So
right.
what are some of the results then if you do have to do this? Well, it could be that the person doesn't get outright terminated, right? So it may be where they have to go to training. It may be anger management. It may be something else. It's possible. Okay. They may face some other type of disciplinary action. That is kind of the one.
Unpaid leave.
Yep, unpaid leave is usually the big one because that's normally where people start hurting is when you tell them, yep, you actually have unpaid leave or, you're not going to be assigned anything for the next couple of weeks here, okay? There is possible mediation. Remember that this is never a good thing because it means they're going to split the baby between the two and nobody's going to be happy about that. But what you might find out is both of them end up on some oil rig in the Alaskan Gulf, or the Alaskan Barren Sea up there, and the other one ends up in Saudi Arabia. You never know, but that's what you might also have. And then ultimately at the very end, it could be that you do relieve them of their job duties when you do have something like that.
And when you
too.
say you don't mean the project manager. You would normally offset that to the Human Resource Department, right?
Right. If you're following the policy, that's probably what's going to end up happening. But you as the actual project manager, right, they're going to come to you and say, how do you want us to try and resolve this first? Because you're actually the lead here. If you need to keep them, you're going to ask them, can they actually try and mediate this somehow or try and actually do some disciplinary action instead of actually just relieving them of their duty. But overall, though, you might find out that they may actually have to do that. Okay? Also, okay, the other thing that you also have to be willing to deal with here, of course, are disgruntled team members, and you've got to be careful here too. Make sure that as you listen to them, okay, make sure you try and figure out what the cause of the dissatisfaction is. And I think I misspelled dissatisfaction. So it figures. All right. So let's see if that happens. Okay. Dissatisfaction. Make sure you stick to the facts, and that's actually key here. Don't embellish. Don't take it away. Don't minimize it. Make sure you stick to the facts. Ask for concrete situations in which they really are upset. Don't say, well, this is how it seems to be. Seems to be is not enough. Give me an example of what's actually happened as well. And then if it can't work out, try and replace that person, get it done quickly, okay? And then clarify and restate what the resolution is because there may not be a resolution with that person and you just don't have the time to deal with it. So there are many ways that we can handle the idea of replacement or the idea here of relieving somebody of their job duty as far as personnel removal and replacement goes. But it's actually very clear that it has to be done sometimes. And it may fall on you as the project manager to actually indicate that it has to be done as well. So there are a lot of things that we really do have to make sure that we take into account. And in personnel management, the great thing is if you have a good HR department, you tend to just follow whatever the policy is and you tell everybody on board,
Leave the
we're
guesswork
following
out
it.
of it.
Yep, and not trying to make up our own policies instead. And that was actually what will help you out the most. So make sure you do take a look at this idea of conflict resolution.
Ronnie, thank you so much for showing us some alternatives we have before we actually do have to go ahead and terminate that employee. Thank you guys so much for staying tuned. We have some more Project Plus coming your way. I'm Cherokee Booth,
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
signing off. Have a great one.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.